provision for independent people that wish to stand for public office, and there can be no doubt that public office includes public office at every level, national, provincial, and municipal, and if elected, to hold office. That right is not being recognized. It's a fundamental human right. That's our contention. And if your Lordship construes this provision together with all of the other provisions of the Constitution that I'm going to refer your Lordship to, unfortunately, time does not allow me to take your Lordship to each and every one of those provisions.
Is it a human right or a democratic right?
It's a human right. It's a fundamental human right, part of the Bill of Rights. It's part of the Bill of Rights, which in terms of Section 7.2, the state has an obligation to honour and to enforce. And that, the Lord, with respect, includes our judges, our state president, and our members of Parliament. Section 7.2 says, this Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, is a cornerstone of democracy in South Africa. It enshrines the rights of all people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. The state must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights. It's a duty, it's a responsibility. And then the rights in the Bill are subject to the limitations contained or referred to in Section 36 of the Bill. And I'm going to come back to that. I'm sure my learned colleagues will argue that very strongly, that telling somebody who must stand through a political party is a reasonable limitation. But there are many other provisions of the Bill of Rights, and I'm not going to have time to take your Lordship through all of them, but can I take you just to the preamble to the Constitution? So, we the people of South Africa recognize the injustices of the past, honour those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, and my Lord, a lot of that was to get a right to vote.
Right to?
A right to vote. People were excluded from the right to vote. People were excluded from our democracy. And we must honour those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who work to build and develop our country, believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution as the supreme law of the country, so as to heal the divisions of the past. Where are we now in relation to healing the divisions of the past with our current electoral system? Establish a society based on democratic values. Where are we now in that regard currently with our current political system? Social justice and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundation for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people. But we don't have a government based on the will of the people with respect at all. We have a government based, if you take people that sit in Parliament, on a decision based on a select few. And every citizen is equally protected by the law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person. No, it's directed to build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. May God protect our people. So, my Lord, we say, if one looks at all of these provisions, and I'm going to
if you think it rationally, those preamble of the Constitution simply sought to concretize what had happened in our past. And in our past, the majority of people were denied the full franchise. So the demand throughout the struggle was for the full franchise. The right to elect and to be elected to a central parliament and all other organs of government. But that itself is circumscribed by the objective conditions. Now, the argument would be weighty if the result of the present system compromises that right to elect and to be elected to a central parliament.
It compromises?
It does. Well, you say it does. But your argument is not based on the political consideration. But that in real terms is what the Constitution is all about. The full franchise was denied to the majority of people in this country. You say that the section of the Constitution is compromised by the failure to afford individuals to stand as individuals,
No, my lord.
as independents.
No, not at all. The provisions of the Constitution don't compromise what he said in the Bill of Rights.
What do you say?
The Electoral Act, not providing for independence, that's what
Yeah,
compromises
the
rights.
Electoral Act, yeah.
Yeah, it's the Constitution is clear, we submit with respect, read in the light of these provisions. But, I mean, you have to say that the whole purpose of the writing of this Constitution was to have a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people. And that's how you must read Section 19. When you decide, did Section 19 intend to say that we would only have a party political system, or that we would have a mixed system, where independents could stand or could not stand? If a party political system doesn't give you a government based on the will of the people, that's a very important consideration to bear in mind. But it goes further than that, and there are many other provisions that I'd like to refer your Lordship to. I can't take you to all of them because there is no time. But can I ask your Lordship to have regard to Section 46? Well, let me go in order. Section 1, which deals with the right to vote. Section 2, Section 3, 1, and subsection 3, 2. Section 7, 1, 7, 2, and 7, 3. Section 8, 1, Section 9, 2, Section 10, Section 18, for example. Everyone has the right to freedom of association. I'm being compelled, my Lord, to vote my government through political parties. I don't want that. That's not freedom of association at all. I want to associate myself with an independent candidate and vote for that independent candidate and get that independent candidate into Parliament. And then, of course, Section 19, which I've already referred your Lordship to. Section 36, that is the reasonable limitation provision, which I'm sure my learned colleagues are going to spend a lot of time dealing with, so perhaps I should deal with that in reply at the same time now. I'll come back to it if there is sufficient time now, but otherwise deal with it in reply. Section 39, my Lord. When you interpret the Bill of Rights, or must promote the values that underlie an open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom. Again, freedom of choice, freedom to stand, freedom to vote, etc., etc. Section 46, my Lord. Very important. This is the section that our learned colleagues rely on. And again, your Lordship will see these words in general pop up. So Section 46 says, composition and election. The National Assembly consists of no fewer than 350 and no more than 400 women and men elected as members in terms of the electoral system that, 1, is prescribed by national legislation, is based on the national common voters' roll, provides for a minimum voting age of 18 years, and results, my Lord, in general, in proportional representation. An Act of Parliament must provide a formula for determining the number of members of the National Assembly. So clearly this should have been taken care of in the Electoral Act, which only deals with party politics, the ability to gain access to Parliament through political parties. So it's absolute. It doesn't result. The Constitution didn't say results in proportional representation. It said results in general in proportional representation. Which tells us, my Lord, that the drafters of this book understood very clearly that provision must be made, we submit this respect, for the rights that are enshrined in Section 19.3, specifically B, of the Constitution. And your Lordship will find a similar provision relating to the provincial legislator, I think that's Section 105. Exactly the same words. A provincial legislature consists of women and men elected as members in terms of the electoral system that, prescribed by legislation based on segment, provides a minimum age, results in general in proportional representation. Every citizen, and then also Section 47, every citizen who is qualified to vote for the National Assembly is eligible to be a member of the National Assembly. how on earth, with respect, do you get that qualification if you have to work through a party list? You have to find favor with the party leaders.
That argument is correct only if you subscribe to a major party and you have to be on that party political list. But if you start your own party, you're number one on the list.
Lord, it doesn't say.
So you don't subscribe, you don't become subordinate to a party leader, you are the party leader.
I need to deal with it. Because one person can't be a party.
No, but you can be two people.
Where one person is a party.
You've got to...
We'll show you a lordship.
You see, the notion of a political party is not people. Parties are identified by their vision of how the country should be governed. Rightly or wrongly, they have a poor vision or an accurate vision. You're either on the left of the political spectrum or the right of the political spectrum. And you advance the debate in clear, coherent terms as to where you stand. Hopefully. I accept that it's not always done, and in this country sometimes the lines are blurred. But it does not follow that the way you suggest is that you're subordinate to party. You're not subordinate to party lists. You're at liberty to form your own party. You can be dominant in the list. You can be one or two or three people dominant in the list. Depends on what confidence people have in you.
Why would you have a system that results in general and proportional representation? If we are limited to a scenario where only people that belong to, form, or part of a political party can become members of the National Assembly, and it's not what the section says. It says every citizen who's qualified to vote for the National Assembly is eligible to be a member of the National Assembly. Not every political party, but every citizen. So, my Lord, that, as far as I can take that argument with respect, I think another one is important. I would ask the Lordship to look at section 39, 46, 47, 105, 106. And then also, my Lord, a section that our learned colleagues rely on, section 157. Because what the Constitution did is it dealt specifically with municipalities. And the provision that deals with municipalities is section 157. And I'd like to read section 157.2 to your Lordship. It says, the election of members to a municipal council as anticipated in subsection 1 must be in accordance with national legislation, which must prescribe a system of proportional representation based on the municipality segment of the national common voters roll, and which provides for the election of members from lists of parties, candidates drawn up in a party's order of preference, or of proportional representation as described in paragraph 8, combined with a system of ward representation based on that municipality segment of the national common voters roll. An electoral system in terms of A must result in general in proportional representation. So having independents stand in their own name as we have in wards is anticipated as a system that in general satisfies this requirement. But, my Lord, I'd like to bring you, with respect, there's also section 195, 1A to F, which just deals with the powers, deals with public administration must be governed by the democratic values and principles enshrined in the Constitution, including the following principles. A high standard of professional ethics must be promoted and maintained. Efficient, economic, and effective use of resources must be promised. And so it goes on, and it deals also with the need for public administration to be accountable. And we submit that provision also therefore has relevance. Then the Lord also like to refer your Lordship to Schedule 6 of the Constitution. And this, with respect, is
Schedule?
Extremely important. Schedule 6.
Schedule 6, I'll look at it.
It is headed, my Lord, Transitional Arrangements. And it deals, Lord, specifically with proportional representation was to be achieved when the Constitution was drafted. There's an Annexure A, which is headed Amendments to Schedule 2 of the previous Constitution. That was the interim Constitution. And then he deals with, for example, parties registered in terms of national legislation and contesting an election on the National Assembly shall nominate candidates for such election on a list of candidates prepared in accordance with the schedule and national legislation. And it goes on to do, in almost verbatim terms, what the schedule to the Electoral Act now does. The schedule that is complained of, insofar as it doesn't provide for independent candidates. Now, if your Lordship wants to have regard to what the intention was of the drafters of the Constitution when Section 19(3)(b) was placed into the Constitution, and it was said that every adult citizen has the right to stand for public office, and proportional representation in general when it comes to the election of members of Parliament and the National Assembly. These are the provisions that your Lordship should look at. And what your Lordship will see was that these provisions were transitional. And it was intended at the time that they would not extend beyond the next election. And this is something with respect which the judge in the Majola judgment completely overlooked.
Which judgment?
In the Majola judgment. That's the case which is more or less on all fours with this one, except it was brought after an election. And the applicant wanted the elections to be declared invalid. Talk about a constitutional crisis. That we certainly don't want in this country. But the judge omitted to have regard to, because he based his judgment on the fact that this schedule, Schedule 6, Annexure A, only provides for access to Parliament through political parties. Exactly the point with respect to your Lordship is making. But he wasn't told, or wasn't advised, or didn't realize that those provisions are only transitional. And that your Lordship will see if you read section, I think they call it item, it's not a section. Item 6(1)(3)(a) to Schedule 6. Item 6(3)(a) to Schedule 6. And item 11(1)(a) to Schedule 6. Item 6 is under the heading National Assembly. And it reads, and I'll start from 6(1), no election of the National Assembly may be held before 30th of April 1999 unless the Assembly is dissolved in terms of Section 52 after motion and conference vote. Section 50 of the new Constitution is suspended. Then, despite the repeal of the previous Constitution, Schedule 2 to that Constitution, as amended by Annexure A to this schedule, applies to the first election of the National Assembly under the new Constitution, which the Lord put differently means that it was intended that the mechanism for determining how the National Assembly be made up through an electoral process, as set out in that schedule, would only apply to the next election. It was clearly intended to be temporary. That the court in Majola did not take. The same applies, my Lord, to the provincial legislature. Section 11(1), despite the repeal of the previous Constitution, Schedule 2 to that Constitution, as amended by Annexure A to this schedule, applies, Section 11(1), Item 11(1)(a), to the first election of a provincial legislature under the new Constitution. You have to ask yourself the question, why, when this Constitution was drafted, why were the provisions that you go through political parties only to reach the National Assembly and the provincial legislature, why were they made temporary if it was the intention that Section 19(3)(b) of the Constitution does not have the meaning that the applicants say must be ascribed? Why would it have been done? So it was envisaged and contemplated at the time that this would be revisited in order to do what the Constitution required. Firstly, give every adult citizen the right to run, and if elected, to stand, or to stand and if elected to form part of the National Assembly. And the same applied to the provincial legislature. We submit, Lord, that's critically important. Don't, with respect to the Lord, make the same mistake as was made in the Majority. Once you read the Majority judgment with appreciating this fact that when the Constitution was drafted, a party political system, and exclusively party political system, was intended to be temporary only. That judgment with respect to the Lord makes absolutely no sense. We agree with our learned colleagues, Lord, that the third step in interpreting a constitutional provision is to look at the historical context. That is dealt with by the second respondent in the heads on page 9, paragraph 16 to 18. If you look at the historical context, my Lord, it explains why an exclusively party political system was temporary only and intended only for the next election and not beyond it. This is confirmed, my Lord. They say, where's the evidence? The evidence is very clear. It's confirmed in volume 3 of the Vincel-Slubber report, paragraphs 111 and 112, if I could take your Lordship to that. Chapter 1, Introduction, page 6. South Africa has been undergoing constitutional transformation since 1993. It's a transformational process, ushered in by the interim constitution of the Republic of South Africa. This constitution provided for the members of the National Assembly and the legislators of the 9 provinces to be elected in 1994 by universal adult franchise in accordance with the system of proportional representation, with minor modifications detailed in Annexure A to Schedule 6 of the Constitution, to which I've just referred, Your Lordship. The 1994 electoral system was carried over to the 1999 national and provincial elections by means of items 6.3a and 11a of Schedule 6 of the Constitution, exactly the provisions that I referred to, Your Lordship. The provisions of the final Constitution relating to the electoral system do not, however, extend beyond the 1999 elections. The intention was we must have an exclusive party political system. Why not make it indefinite? They didn't, Lord. That's critically important. The Constitution requires an electoral system be introduced through the enactment of national legislation. Thus, there is at present no electoral system prescribed for the conduct of national and provincial elections scheduled for the second or third quarter of 2004. This situation led to Cabinet to establish an electoral task team to draft legislation for an electoral system for the next national and provincial election. In executing its mandate, the task team will be guided inter alia by the relevant provisions of the Constitution. And Your Lordship will see, if you read that report, they have the top expert in the country talk to them about what was required by the Constitution. And yes, it is a constituency system, but it's a system where we can identify and independent people can stand. The same, Lord, much the same is said in the high-level report, in the Plante report, to which I referred to Your Lordship earlier. Under the heading, page 71, and Lord, if Your Lordship reads this report, the Plante report was set up in order to look at matters that needed to be attended to by government, and it had an order of priority. And top of the list, with respect to it, top of the list was this item dealing with how our government must be made up. But let me read to you from page 524 of that report on page 71. The interim constitution, 1993, provided for the members of the National Assembly and the legislators of the 9 provinces to be elected in the first democratic elections by universal adult franchise in accordance with the system of proportional representation.
What paragraph is that?
It's just headed the electoral system. 524, it's on page 71 of the Lordship's bundle. Bundle 3. The interim constitution provided for the members of the National Assembly and the legislators of 9 provinces to be elected in the first democratic elections by universal and ad hoc franchise in accordance with the system of proportional representation, with minor modifications. The 1994 electoral system was carried over to the 1999 national provisions of the final constitution relating to the electoral system did not extend beyond the 1999 elections. Same point with respect made there before. But I'd like your Lordship to turn to the next page, page 525. The primary argument in support of this proposal is that the best electoral model to ensure individual accountability. One of the major challenges with the current electoral system is the weakness of the PR system in holding politicians to account to the electorate. Members of Parliament are appointed not directly by voters. So where's government the will of the people? Not directly by voters, but rather by their party, based on candidate lists submitted to the Electoral Commission ahead of the elections. This makes them beholden to the party and its leadership, rather than voters, and places party politics and loyalties ahead of effectiveness and delivery. By contrast, a constituency system will hold politicians more directly accountable to the voters and will better ensure that election promises are kept.
But your argument is not for the constituencies.
Well, it could be, but I mean, as long as independent candidates can stand. In due course, all that we are saying...
You can't say you've got to choose either way, if you wish. Because I pointed out to you what the problem with the constituency system in the country is. We inherited spatial apartheid. It exists. If we have a constituency-based election, people will be elected on the apartheid lines. So the compromise, the system that's come into, does away with that sort of...
it depends, Lord, again, and I did raise this...
It's a question of independence, yes. But one doesn't want independence to be subscribed by the colour of one's skin.
Absolutely.
On a constituency-based election, if I must stand in Clifton, I would have the remotest prospect of being elected, as articulate as I am.
My Lord, what is a constituency? Is a constituency necessarily, firstly, a geographic area?
Well, constituencies are geographic areas. That's the one problem with the constituency system. The other is, we know what happened in 1948, the chicanery that underpins democrating constituencies for election.
Well, I'm not debating that with you.
And you also know from your history that more people voted against the Nationalist Party than for the Nationalist Party in 1948. And apartheid came into being because of the constituency system that then prevailed. So these systems have the inherent loaded problems. It's an important political decision that is made by the elected representatives to find a system that best gives effects. Not simply that gives effect to the democratic will of the people, but best advances democracy itself. I've given too much of a speech, Mr. Watson.
No, Lord, I absolutely agree with you, Lord. Where government is based on the will of the people, where leaders are elected based on the will of the people, not on the whims of a few party political bosses to whom they then owe allegiance. That's not the kind of democracy that was envisaged. Perhaps at the time, your Lordship is right, there was a need to do what was done. And that's why Schedule A, Annex A to Schedule 6, was a tentative arrangement. And with respect to Lord, I am not submitting to your Lordship that we must have a constituency-based system in terms of geographic areas. A constituency system, or a system where parties can vote for groups. Take the second applicant, for example. She stands for an entire nation, the First Nation people of our country. She wants to stand in Parliament to represent their interests. She wants to speak as a woman on their behalf.
That also, I must point out to you, she stands for the nation. That nation itself is a contentious term. Nation in creation nationhood.
First Nation.
No, but in creation nationhood, one has a peculiar definition of what the
Lord, if
word
you read
nation
her
is.
affidavit, your Lordship will see
No,
that she stands
it's
very much.
It's sensitive to say that any particular group, First Nation maybe what the debated on, constitutes the nation. We fought very long and hard in this country to create a nation.
Absolutely.
And
But
we
there are
defend
groupings.
nationhood.
There are groupings within the nation whose rights we
This-
can no longer ignore.
You see, you can't be devoid of history. In this country, the notion of nationhood has developed, not now, but through enormity of struggle. The notion of a nationhood was developed. And that's a nationhood which the courts are obliged to defend. That's the nationhood that the Constitution underpins. So I don't think in terms that new nation should be used loosely, freely. One must defend the nationhood of all South Africans.
I could not agree with your Lordship more, but the second respondent...
But that's political rather than...
the second
I
respondent
perhaps
doesn't-
exceed my mandate.
The second respondent doesn't say anything other than that. She wants to unite the people of our country. That's what she says. That's what she stands for. That's one of her causes. So,
On
all
another
right.
occasion,
Well, can I
we will
continue?
debate what new nation
I've got
means.
limited time and I must finish.
No, please, you take your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Castle is eager to get on his feet.
So, I think I'm just going to refer your Lordship to the foot of the page. I'll get to take you through the whole page. You can read that later. But it is said that the proportional representation system distances Parliament from the people. Although constituency offices do exist, most people are unaware of their constituency representatives or of the existence of the offices. A consistency-based system would bridge the gap by allowing people, by ensuring, that people directly elect the representative who they want in a multi-member constituency system. Such a system would also enable citizens to exercise their constitutionally guaranteed right to stand for public office independently at a national and provincial level. This is not possible under the current system. And then in the conclusion, Parliament's role in facilitating and overseeing implementation of the state's laws and policies. The most fundamental recommendations relate to the institutional reform of Parliament to make it more effective in holding government to account for its performance. So, Lord, with respect to the Conte report, also recognises the constitutional right of independence to stand and recognises the need for parliamentary reform as a matter of urgency, and he prioritises that, which your Lordship reads in the report in its entirety. So it recognises too urgency. Lord, the Majola judgment, the Lordship please have regard to the following paragraphs. Paragraph 30, 32, 33, 35, and 46. And from those paragraphs, your Lordship will see that fundamentally the entire judgment is flawed because it does not appreciate that the interim provisions fell away after the next election and assumes that those provisions continue to apply beyond the next elections. And so it is not a useful precedent to rely on at all. And as submitted to your Lordship before, we believe that that is probably the reason why the Constitutional Court, despite that judgment, was not prepared to deal with this matter as a court of first instance when we asked for it. And once your Lordship to reflect on the validity of that judgment, and we submitted that judgment with respect is fundamentally bad. That brings me, my Lord, to the My Vote Council.
Oh, my word.
My vote. I want to make the submission, Lord, that a careful reading of that judgment, is probably
That's the judgment of the CJ.
the My Vote Council judgment, is probably all that is required for your Lordship to arrive at a decision in this matter. Because it deals with the right to vote. It deals with how to ensure that the right to vote is meaningful. And of course, its corollary is who to vote for. Now, Your Lordship will see there were 11 judges of the Constitutional Court sitting in that matter, 2 acting judges. As far as the central issues that are relevant to this case is concerned, all of the judges were admitted. There was a Frenneman J doing his thing, but not in disagreement with anything that is of fundamental importance to this.
Give me a copy of it.
I'm hoping
You got a.
Can I hand one up to you?
You have given me. You have given me. You have given me a file of cases. There is one. Yeah? Sorry, I do have one. You may give us. There's not give me the copy.
Not part of it. I believe it's not part of the
It's not part of what. Let's have a look at it.
Now, my Lord, what
Thank you,
is
Mr.
interesting, the
Nelson.
background to this judgment is important. It is a matter, my Lord, that originally came before this division. And Your Lordship's sister, Mia J, heard the matter. And, my Lord, she gave a judgment. And she gave a judgment that the provisions of PIA, insofar as they're admitted to deal with meaningfully gaining access to information about where political parties got their funding from, was not in alignment with the Constitution, and that the provisions of PIA needed to be amended to make provision for that. Now, my Lord, what I'd like to stress
Yes, sir.
What I would like to stress, my Lord, is that Mia J's judgment dealt with independent candidates at municipal level and political parties at national and provincial level. And the disclosure that must be made by individual candidates at municipal level and the disclosure that must be made by political parties operating at national and provincial legislative level. The Constitutional Court has made it very clear that the provisions relating to disclosure do not only apply to independent candidates standing at municipal level. It has made it absolutely clear that the provisions relating to disclosure apply to independent candidates standing at national level. That, I submit to Your Lordship, makes this more than an obiter dictum. It is an essential part of the judgment itself that the Constitutional Court has recognized that independent candidates can stand for the national and provincial legislatures, and because they can stand, provision must be made for them also to make a full disclosure in relation to how and by whom they are being funded. So I had planned, my Lord, to take you through this judgment.
Just take me through the key aspects.
Would Your Lordship like me to do?
Just highlight the sections you want me to.
Certainly.
Okay.
Can I ask Your Lordship first to turn to paragraph 60? Your Lordship will see that the judgment made by Your Lordship's sister Mia J is dealt with at 60. It is declared that information about the private funding of political parties and independent ward candidates, the latter concept is contemplated in section 16 of the Local Government Municipal Electoral Act, registered for elections or any legislative body established under the Constitution, is reasonably required for the effective exercise of the right to vote in such elections and to make political choices in terms of section 19.1, 19.3, 32 and 72 of the Constitution. So when she was dealing with independent candidates, this I need to stress more. It was within the context that this applies only to independent candidates standing for office at municipal level. If your Lordship turns to the order that was made by the Constitutional Court in this matter, and your Lordship will find that on the first page, the order of the constitutional invalidity made by the Western Cape Division of the High Court is confirmed in these terms. It is declared that information on the private funding of political parties and independent candidates is essential for the effective exercise of the right to make political choices and to participate in the elections. It is declared that information on private funding of political parties and independent candidates must be recorded, preserved, and made easily accessible. And so it goes on. And my Lord, what you will see if you read this judgment is when the court talks about political parties and it talks about access of people to the National Assembly and the provincial legislature, it talks about political parties and independent candidates. I counted, my Lord, and in this judgment, no less than 55 times is a reference made to political parties and independent candidates. And this judgment is applicable, we would submit with great respect, to the independent candidates whose rights are recognized in Section 19.3b, and the Constitutional Court says that in express terms, my Lord, in paragraph 26, under the heading, the citizens' right to express their will, on which government is based, is provided from Section 19 of the Constitution in these terms. And then Section 19, to which I've already referred, Your Lordship, is quoted. And in the footnote, the preamble, to which I referred, Your Lordship, is also quoted. In paragraph 27, the section highlights the right every citizen has to make political choices. Choice is of its own a loaded concept, and much more is required if a choice is to be made, is political in character and affects important national interests. The gravity of the choice is more pronounced in relation to the right of an adult citizen to participate or vote in the elections for any legislative body. This is because of the centrality of elections in the functioning, preservation, effectiveness of our constitutional democracy. To recruit members or supporters and campaign for a political party or a political cause. I've highlighted those words already in the law.
Where are you reading that?
Information would be needed on paragraph 28. To be able to distinguish one's party or cause from others would likewise require access to information about them. One also needs to know more about one's competitors to be able to appreciate their strengths, expose their weaknesses or wrongdoings, and magnify one's strengths and make an informed comparison between presumably more progressive policies and objectives in theirs. And then, my Lord, finally, the section addresses the fundamental right, I'm talking about section 19, the fundamental right every adult citizen has, quote, to stand for public office and, if elected, to hold office. Our Constitution does not itself limit the enjoyment of this right to local government elections. The right to stand for public office is tied up to the right to vote in elections for any legislative body. That is constitutionally established. Meaning, every adult citizen may, in terms of the Constitution, stand as an independent candidate to be elected to municipalities, provincial legislatures, or the National Assembly. The enjoyment of this right is not and has not been prescribed by the Constitution. It is just not facilitated by legislation, i.e. there's an omission to deal with. But that does not mean that the right is not available to be enjoyed by whoever might have lost confidence in political parties. It does, in my view, remain open to be exercised whenever so desired, regardless of whatever logistical constraints might exist. The issues before us, that's paragraph 30, must be addressed as they ought to apply to political parties and independent candidates. It's in the context of independent candidates exercising the rights referred to in section 29 of this is said, for any constitutionally recognized legislative body. After all, The need for the recorded and disclosure of information ought to be fundamentally the same for all political parties and independent candidates, regardless of whether or not they are registered or seek to hold office at a local, provincial, or national level. And the parties in this matter have all grounded their contentions on the Constitution. It is to those provisions that we must address ourselves. And I'll just finish up with all. Some of those values on which our democratic state is founded are universal adult suffrage, a national common voters' vote, regular elections, and a multi-party system of democratic government to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness. Citizens thus exercise their right to vote in terms of the Constitution. They presumably want to vote into public office people with character, credentials, and qualities necessary to build the future that every responsible and patriotic citizen yearns for. On a party political list decided on by party bosses, I don't see it. And that is a future that would redound to the good of all citizens. Regular elections, accountability, responsiveness, openness, and public office bearers who are committed to the core values and principles for good governance laid down in section 195 are what will facilitate the attainment of the South Africa we all deserve. The right to vote derives its fundamentality from the central role voting plays in the establishment, functionality and vibrancy of a constitutional democracy. It is a prerequisite for the very existence of the legislator and the executives at all levels of state. And proper exercise of that right is so critical to the coming into being of our political arms of the state and the effective and efficient functioning of the entire state machinery, that the need for transparency and accountability from those seeking public office is evidently more pronounced. The future of the nation largely stands or falls on how elections are conducted. Who gets elected into public office? How and why they get voted in? Only when transparency and accountability occupy center stage, before, during, and after the elections, may hope for a better tomorrow.
The why is important because the why implies that the person or party that stands must have a coherent political position.
I missed that, I'm sorry.
The why is important, why you get elected. You can only get elected if the electorate understands what and what you're standing for, why and what you're standing for. It implies a coherent political position, which preeminently well displayed through a political party.
I disagree with your Lordship.
You disagree with the conclusion.
It is one way, it is not the only way.
Yeah.
In fact, Your Lord, I make the submission to your Lordship that if you compel people to stand through of the Constitution is that independent can stand, independent candidates can stand to be voted, and if elected can stand for public office. I believe I'm out of my
I see the judgment as a heading that said what is to be done.
Yes. That's interesting too.
That's a historical precedent for what is to be done. But this one has a question mark there.
Yes.
It was originally enunciated by Lenin. He just said this exclamation mark. He said what is to be done.
Well, I'm sure, Lord, you will assist the nation.
If you're familiar with the history of that period.
So, the Lord, perhaps, I have only 5 minutes left at this stage. Lord, but what I would like to point out to your Lordship, also with reference to the My Vote Counts judgment, the court in the My Vote Count matter actually dealt with the point that I've been trying to make to your Lordship over and over, perhaps less eloquently than it's dealt with in that judgment.
No, please do.
As to what the court should do. And I want your Lordship, whilst dealing with this, to bear in mind that in the my vote count matter, there was legislation pending.
Yeah.
And the court made its pronouncement.
Yeah.
And the court,
now, what should I do with this in your view?
Let's give guidance, is effectively what the court said. So if I can ask your Lordship to turn to paragraph 76. It does not fall, says Chief Justice Mkweng, within the remit of this court to prescribe to Parliament whether the recordal, preservation and disclosure of all information relating to private funding should be regulated in terms of PIA, or PIA and another legislation, or PIA and other measures. Again, this is a decision to be taken by Parliament itself. Our duty is to articulate the unfulfilled obligation in broad terms, but with sufficient clarity to give Parliament a fair sense of what is required of it. We are required to provide broad guidelines on what could be considered by parliamentarians in developing a fitting regulatory framework in this connection. The fundamental principle that must be underscored here is that information on the private funding of political parties and independent candidates must be held or recorded, preserved, and reasonably accessible. So, my Lord, with respect, if your Lordship were to grant an order as prayed for in the notice of motion, and I think in particular paragraphs 2, the second and third, not from the urgent relief, it's paragraphs 3 and 4, that the omission to provide for independent candidates.
You know, I'll ask you a cost. Cost is not an issue in this case.
I don't think our learned colleague will argue about costs.
Nobody's arguing.
We know what happens, even if your Lordship will find against us. Let's hope that doesn't happen. If your Lordship finds in our favour, costs follow the suit. If your Lordship finds against us, we don't have to make these costs all the way people stand up to make our country better. And that principle is well established. I don't think I'll do it. So, that is, my Lord, we would submit all that your Lordship should do. And I want to take your Lordship to another paragraph of the judgment. Paragraph 81. Under the heading suspension of the declaration of invalidity. We know that the Speaker is going to say this must be suspended because it's going to take so much time, it can't be done. Well, the matter, the court said the High Court suspended the declaration of invalidity for 18 months in order to allow Parliament to remedy the defects in PIA and to allow for the recordal and disclosure of private funding of political parties and independent candidates. Lord, with great respect, we would submit, it's not something that this court needs to even trouble itself with. If you look at section 172 of the Constitution, important paragraph, paragraph 86. I have only a few minutes left with my allocated time. If I may use that making submissions to you. Thank you. Paragraph 86. The court says it bears emphasis that there's no section of PIA's application is tangibly or actually affected by the declaration of invalidity. The purpose of the declaration of invalidity is to alert Parliament to its inadvertent dereliction of the constitutional duty. It must amend PIA, and if so advised, pass another legislation that would remedy the deficiency now detected and brought to its attention. There is thus no purpose that would be served by suspending the declaration of invalidity. In paragraph 89, in conclusion, declarations of constitutional invalidity are often accompanied by a suspension. But the underlying reason is is that a failure to do so would otherwise yield consequences adverse to the rights or interests hitherto enjoyed or advanced. It should never be done without a purpose. If that were ever done by this court before, it would have been an oversight. We dare not shy away from correction. We are not to follow our judgments or aspects of them, even when they are demonstrably incorrect. It should be right to acknowledge and correct our errors. Remedies given by our courts must, after all, be effective. Now, Lord, I want to point out one other thing, and that is in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of section 172, 2A, I'm going to quote it, the Supreme Court of Appeal, the High Court of South Africa, or a court of similar status, may make an order concerning the constitutional validity of an act of Parliament, a provincial act, or any act of the President, but an order of constitutional invalidity has no force unless it is confirmed by the Constitutional Court. Master Lordship also, if you look at section 167(5) of the Constitution, which says the following: the Constitutional Court makes the final decision whether an act of Parliament, a provincial act of conduct of the President is constitutional, and must confirm any order of invalidity made by the Supreme Court of Appeal, the High Court, or a court of similar status, before the order has any force. With respect, until such time as this matter serves before the Constitutional Court, it has no force, it doesn't affect anybody or anything. And what the Constitutional Court did in this matter did not uphold the Court of Crow's decision to suspend the effectiveness of the order, because how do you suspend an omission? Make provision for a constitutional right. What it did do is it prescribed a time period within which the Constitutional Court, which Parliament had to remedy the situation. And we submit that most probably that is what the Constitutional Court will do in this instance, and that has got to go to the Constitutional Court. So the Lordship need not trouble himself with issues of suspension and the likes. I have not addressed your Lordship on the issue of separation of powers. I don't have time to do so, and if necessary, I will do that.
Any outstanding matters you could deal with in the reply, Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Lord.
Could I just, and in fairness to my learned friend, I must place on record a difficulty. My learned friend has asked your Lordship for an order that is going to affect the forthcoming elections, and he hasn't addressed any argument to your Lordship on it. Now, with great respect, I don't want to be in a position where I'm hearing his argument for the first time in reply. So I'm placing on record that my learned friend has not addressed your Lordship on that issue. I will deal with it in the course of my address. My learned friend has seen my heads of argument, but I would have thought that would be a matter that would be addressed.
Mr. Nelson, I'll give you a minute or two to respond to that.
Well, we respond quite simply that we're in a zone of unknown. We're in a zone of the unknown. We don't know, with respect, whether or not the Lordship's judgment is going to give rise to a postponement of the Constitution. That will have to be a substantive application. It will have to be properly motivated. It will have to be supported by whoever feels they want to support it. And it will have to be brought to the right party. And your Lordship is not, with respect to the right entity to bring that application. It's certainly not directly. So that's not an issue that we can address now. Whether or not your Lordship's finding has an impact on the coming election is not for us to debate right now. We submit, my Lord, if he doesn't, fine. If he does, well then he does. The law is the law. The Constitution either provides for independence to stand, and that is the decision your Lordship must make, or it does not. If the Constitutional Court, in confirming your Lordship's order, decides to grant a period of time, for example, for correction, then so be it. Then there will be that period of time for correction. I have submitted to your Lordship, and I made the submission last time as well, that there is nothing that will prevent the President of our country to call a special meeting of Parliament. He has that power in terms of the Constitution. He expressly has that power. I'll try and find the section quickly if I may, but I don't think it's really important right now. My memory serves me correctly. It was section 84. 84A of the Constitution says, the President has the powers entrusted by the Constitution and legislation, including those necessary to perform the functions of head of state and head of the national executive, one of which, my Lord, is to ensure that human rights, especially those in the Bill of Rights, are entrenched. That the respondent is President is responsible for D, summoning the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, or Parliament to an extraordinary sitting to conduct special business. It can be done.
Thank you,
How,
Mr.
when, where it can be done. So whether a court feels that it's appropriate or not, the date for the election has been set. There are provisions in the Electoral Act that deal with its postponement. It has to be postponed within the time period stipulated in the Constitution. And it's an application that will be decided on its merits. So whether the Speaker feels right now that it's impossible to do all these things that need to be done, well, it's an extraordinary situation. What we do not want with respect, is post this election for an application to be brought that says the election is invalid because it took place contrary to the provisions of our Constitution, and we must have a re-election. That, my lord, is going to result in chaos and would be most inappropriate.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Let's
Nelson.
let issues of postponement be dealt with when those applications are brought. They'll have to be properly motivated. Your Lordship is called upon only to make a declaration of constitutional invalidity and a direction to Parliament that it does what it can to allow independence to stand as soon as possible. No more, no less than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
Mr. Cassidy?
Lord Mayor, just end up references cases which referred to. In my list, my Lord, I intend to read two of those cases.
Mr. Cassidy, we can have 15 minutes and then 15 minutes after lunch.
Yes, my Lord.
I'll give you some breathing space.
Fine, my Lord. We would submit, my Lord, the issue your Lordship has to determine is to be found, my Lord, at page 265 of the papers, whether, my Lord, Section 57A and Schedule 1A to the Electoral Act ought to be declared constitutional or not. That's really the issue your Lordship is faced with. What your Lordship is not dealing with is to what extent the second applicant can address the ills of our society. It's not an issue before your Lordship. We would submit, my Lord, that the starting point is an interpretation of Section 19 of the Constitution, and your Lordship will see that that's been dealt with by the Constitutional Court. May I ask your Lordship to turn to the bundle which I've handed up to your Lordship at page 76. You got a copy for Mr. Nelson? The cases.
This is the case of Ramakatsa.
Ramakatsa. And your Lordship will see there is an interpretation, my Lord, by Justices Mosineke and Justice Jafta at pages 60, paragraph 63, my Lord, and I'll ask your Lordship to have regard to that interpretation up to paragraph 74. So it's page 76 to 77, and your Lordship will see there's a full analysis, my Lord, of section 19, 1, 2, and 3. In paragraph 64, my Lord, I do not propose to read everything, my Lord. 64, the scope and content of the rights entrenched by this section may be ascertained by means of an interpretation process which must be informed by context that is both historical and constitutional. During the apartheid order, the majority of our people in our country were denied political rights which were enjoyed by the minority. The majority of black people could not form or join political parties. Is the point, your Lordship, so pertinently debated with our learned friend. I'm not going to continue reading them, my Lord. Your Lordship will see that in 66, in the main, elections are contested by political parties. It is these parties which determine list of candidates who get elected to legislative bodies. Even the number of seats in the National Assembly and provincial legislatures are determined by taking into account available scientifically based data and representation by interested parties. 76. My Lord, in 67, in order to enhance multi-party democracy, the Constitution has enjoined Parliament to enact national legislation and provides for funding of political parties represented in national and provincial legislatures. Public resources are directed at political parties for the very reason that they are veritable vehicles the Constitution has chosen for facilitating and entrenching democracy. And then, my Lord, 68, our democracy is founded on a
So they're
party.
not simply,
My lord,
if I may respectfully differ with a very distinguished friend and colleague, Mr. Neke, it's not simply that the political parties are vehicles of the Constitution. They're vehicles of ideas. Vehicles in which a vision is expected of a future society. Is that more correct, isn't it? In other words, you advance society by, as a political party, envisaging what sort of society you want.
because you have a
And the
manifesto.
political party constitutes the vehicle to do that.
Yes. Because your political party will spell out its ideology and its own ambition and its purpose.
And ideology is not simply the swear word.
No.
Without an ideology, you have no vision. So whatever your ideology is, right or wrong,
Vote for a party
it's the vision of a future
for what they
society.
stand for. My lord. If they don't fulfill that mandate, and the next time you don't.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the lineages was wrong, but it's just a different sort of emphasis.
Well, my lord, I simply would ask your lordship to just consider, my lord, the interpretation because it's already been interpreted.
That's good.
That's a point on me.
Yeah.
But there's one aspect I want to highlight, my lord, and that is the last paragraph, my lord, in 68. The Constitution itself obliges every citizen to exercise the franchise to a political party. Therefore, political parties are indispensable conduits for the enjoyment of the right given by Section 19(3)(a) to vote in elections. I want to pause there. Now, my learned friend, Mr. Butlander, my lord, is going to analyze the judgment of Chief Justice in my vote counts.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt, my lord, you demonstrate to your lordship why paragraph 29 is what appears to be disjointed in what was the debate in that particular case, which was an attack on the provisions of PAIA, which did not provide a methodology, an effective methodology to understand and to ascertain who is funding which political party and which politician. Now, I know another friend says independent candidates, but that wasn't the issue. When your lordship reads the judgment of Mr. Justice Forneman in 5 paragraphs, paragraphs 92 to 95, your lordship will understand, my lord, clearly why PAIA served as a stumbling block and not to facilitate access to information. That was the issue in that case. And what is Chief Justice there does...
But that judgment is obviously correct. I mean,
Of
besides
course.
the fact
Of
that
course.
it's a constitutional court judgment.
My lord, you did in 90 paragraphs with the greatest
Yes.
respect, my lord, to make the point made in the 5-point paragraph to say, PAIA is there to facilitate transparency. You can't use PAIA to block vital information that should be in the public arena. Paragraph 29 here, my lord, is really disjointed with great respect, and my lord, an aberration, I would submit, and intruding in otherwise legislative functions. So, my lord, I now leave with paragraph 68, and I invite your lordship then to read up to paragraph 74, and the interpretation issue, with great respect, has been dealt with. The second item I want to deal with, my lord, is what onus does the applicant have in the debate before your lordship? And before we look at the founding affidavit, may I ask your lordship to have regard to paragraph 20 of the judgment handed up, my lord, the judgment of
Well,
Mr.
I've
Justice.
read this judgment before,
Which one, my lord?
this particular judgment, but the point I made earlier, he actually deals with it
Yes, my lord.
later on in this next page.
Yes, my lord. He does, my lord. That's how we invited your lordship to read it.
This judgment not so long ago, 2013.
Yes, my lord. It's a judgment your lordship will recall about. It started off in the Free State, my lord.
Yes.
Where a number of ANC members complained, my lord, about not having adequate notice of a certain election. And in fact, my lord, the Constitutional Court then found that the procedural deficiencies were substantial and sets aside the resolutions that were taken. But in the discourse, my lord, they had to look at the constitution of the ANC and to see to what extent it measured up to the provisions of Section 19 of our Constitution. And in that particular discourse, my lord, entire context is given to Section 19, which is the debate that we're having today. And I would submit, my lord, that's already been decided by the Constitution. Then the next issue, my lord, is really a judgment of the Constitutional Court, which I've handed up to your lordship, is New National Party of South Africa versus the government of the Republic of South Africa. This particular case, my lord, had to deal with whether...
Judgment of Jacob J. in his better days.
Yes. My lord, it's reported, I've written down, it's reported in 1999, Volume 3, Essay 191. Yes, your lordship will see that it was an attack, my lord, on the Electoral Act, which provided for barcoding. 80% of South African citizens had a barcoded. But what's important for this particular case, my lord, is paragraph 20. I mean, just ask the lawyer to go to paragraph 20. I want to just finish off with this judgment before we get to adjourn.
Paragraph 20.
20. A second constraint is that the electoral scheme must not infringe any of the fundamental rights enshrined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. The onus is once again on the party who alleges an infringement of the right to establish. The contention in this appeal is that impugned provisions of the Electoral Act constituted a denial of the right to vote to a substantial number of South African citizens. Any scheme designed to facilitate the exercise of this right carries with it the possibility that some people will not comply with these provisions. But that does not make the scheme unconstitutional. The decisive question, which your lordship will have to answer in this case, in which I'm going to submit the answer is very easy, my lord. The decisive decision which arises for consideration in this case is the following. When can it legitimately be said that a legislative measure designed to enable people to vote, in fact, results in the denial of that right?
That's the point I've been making.
That's a simple point. Now, when your lordship reads paragraph...
I would say throughout the right, I mean, what is the right? The political right is not what the Constitution says.
It's a simple issue of fact, this case. But can I leave that for after that?
What I'm saying is that the political right is the right to elect and be elected to the political powers of organ. Now, does this provision in any way compromise that right?
Yes. Then I'm not going to...
But Jacob makes the point here.
Your lordship put it very clear.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to read the balance of paragraph 20. Then your lordship will also just have regard to 22 and 23 in the course of when your lordship is re-looking at this matter, because there it deals with how you approach a statutory instrument when you're asserting that that particular statutory instrument impinges on a basic fundamental right. That's the test.
Which paragraph is that?
22 and 23. Then, my lord, on the merits, I have one more point to make, my lord, because then your lordship, with great respect, it's not a difficult question of law, it's a simple issue of fact. And that, my lord, can we deal with it after lunch?
Yes, sir.
Yes, your lordship.
You're on a journal?
Sorry, my lord.
You're on a journal.
The lordship said I could carry on for 15 minutes and then take an adjournment. I'm just complying with the directive.
That's fine. Court will adjourn until 2:15.